Hi again. Welcome to the podcast. Todd, Milewski, and Nicole Haase with you from USCHO.com. It's been quite a week in the U.S. as far as hockey goes, with gold medals for the women's and men's Olympic teams. We will get to the women's triumph over Canada last Thursday in a couple of minutes, but we are into the playoffs in college hockey for a couple of conferences already, and 3 more are joining this week. And so, Nicole, I want to touch on what was really right away on Friday, one of the most stunning results I can remember in a playoffs in conference tournament play anyway. Union going into Clarkson in the 12-5 matchup in ECAC Hockey and getting a 2-1 win last Friday afternoon. Emma Rayom made 39 saves, 19 of them in the third period for Union, and Karianne Engelbert and Megan Duplanty had the first period goals for the Garnet Chargers, which, I mean, ending a
Probably
season.
if not the biggest, it's gotta be one of the biggest wins
Yeah,
in their program,
I,
right?
I would have to think so. Ending Clarkson's season in the first game of the playoffs is
We've been talking about it for weeks. We said it's gonna be chaos.
it is chaos, and the single game round plays into that
Yeah.
too. If that's a best of 3,
Yeah.
I don't know if that really ends up that way. I think Clarkson
Yeah.
calling comes
You
back
think
in games 2 and 3.
you think ECAC meetings this summer have a conversation about
There there may be another point on the agenda for that of do we go back to best of 3 there. Yeah, it's just this is what can happen when a season doesn't really. I feel like there was more potential for Clarkson, and it never really fully got reached because of so many ups and downs throughout the season. And now
Yeah.
the season's over.
Yeah, things just never quite clicked or fell in place or sort of whatever idiom you want to use there. The potential was there and the talent was there, but it just never all quite came together in the way that they wanted or needed it to. And the result was this loss. I mean, certainly, some of it is running into a Union, like the goaltender played spectacularly, including a behind the back catch. A puck went up and hit her in the back of the neck, and then she threw her glove behind her. Just absolutely spectacular. But it was it was exactly what we've been talking about is gonna happen. I don't think it's the only upset we're gonna see in that tournament. In other tournaments as well, but that one I think is just the most right for these upsets. The middle of the ECAC, or I guess at this point, 12 is not even the middle. But yeah, the ECAC has been full of upsets this season, and I just think we're gonna keep seeing that. The parity there is huge, and when you have 3 teams within a point of each other at the top of the league, that tells you, sort of what we're dealing with. And it's less than 6 points to the middle of the
Right.
league standings. So, it's just been a hot mess, complimentary in all season. Complimentary as a fan, love it for all of us. It's been fun to watch, and I don't see that changing. And definitely didn't expect this one, but also not surprised, right? Ultimately, I mean, I am, but we knew this could happen, and I think Union is one of those teams that's just shown that they're able to put together a really complete game, and I hope that for them this is a sign of sort of that another step of development. It's not stealing games next year. It's winning some more of those, doing maybe a little more what Brown did this year. So yeah.
Mhm.
Ultimately, we've been talking all last couple weeks about Clarkson hovering on the edge, and that conversation's over.
Right. Absolutely. The other 3 ECAC hockey first round games all went to the home teams. Colgate beating RPI 4-2 on Friday. Brown beating Dartmouth 7-2 on Saturday. The 8-9 game did go to overtime. St. Lawrence took 2 leads in that game, but Harvard came back both times and then won it in overtime, 3-2. Kaylee McDonald scoring 3:23 into the extra session for the Crimson to move on there. That was the one that I thought, when you get into those matchups, 8-9 always feels like the one that
Yeah.
is going to be closest, right? But and so that one did deliver as an opening there for the Saints with a couple of leads, but just couldn't hold on. Harvard ends up moving on. We'll talk a little bit more about the weekend ahead and what's coming in the quarterfinal matchups at the end of our show today, but it's just going to set up to be another weekend of potential chaos like we've seen out of everything out of ECAC so far this season. So why should this be any different?
Yeah, I mean, overall, it was kind of a weekend of chaos, right? We had tons of overtime
Yeah.
games, and so I just feel like that's prescient of what we're going to continue to see as the postseason continues on from here. Yeah, over at Victory Press, I always put some of the goals of the week, and I literally did a whole one of them with just overtime game winners from this weekend. So, it was a good fitting send off to the regular season, and I hope really setting us up for another fun postseason.
Yeah. One of those overtime games, so playoff overtime game again, was in Atlantic Hockey, where the 6-7 game had Robert Morris playing Delaware. By the way, 6-7 game. I just had to, like, I hate even saying that now, but
Yeah.
just the way they set that up this year with having 7 teams, couldn't let it go. Robert Morris fell behind 2-0 in the second period, but clawed their way back. Jessica McKinnon scores on a power play in overtime to give the Colonials a 3-2 victory. Delaware's first season ends at a 2-31 record. This first season, is about building for the program. I think any wins were kind of a bonus. But getting some playoff experience and I'm sure that'll be valuable. Yeah, that'll be valuable.
Right, and I think just like showing that fight, right? Like, I think it's really important that, like, in a top season, in your very first season, that in that very final game, they were still pushing to the absolute end as possible, right? And had every opportunity to win that as much as Robert Morris did, and that I think just probably speaks really well to what we can expect from them in the future. I just appreciate it. I know it's going to be so hard in that first season and with so few wins. So I just think it speaks well to the character of the team that they were still fighting and clawing in those final minutes.
Yeah, Lindenwood then knocked out Robert Morris on Saturday 3-1, and Syracuse got a double overtime victory at RIT on Saturday 4-3. Emma Gennady, I couldn't find a pronunciation guide. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, but I apologize in advance. Scored 324 into double overtime there. First 2 overtime game comes early this postseason as the Orange moves on. Syracuse at Penn State, Lindenwood at Mercyhurst coming up this week. We'll talk a little bit more again about those later. There was out in the West where the final weekend of the regular season was happening in the WCHA, an important series that we kind of touched on last week. As I think I said something about I need to see something from Minnesota Duluth, and I saw something from Minnesota Duluth. A pair of overtime victories at Ritter Arena in Minnesota. 3-2 on Friday, 2-1 on Saturday. Tova Henderson getting both overtime goals for the Bulldogs. Ev Gascon makes 31 saves Friday, 34 saves Saturday. I guess that's what I wanted to see. If Duluth was going to be a factor here, they needed to finish the regular season with a statement, and it doesn't get them full points like a couple of regulation wins would, but going into Ritter and winning a couple of games is a pretty decent statement as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think that's a statement from any team. I think one of the best things about that to me is Tova Henderson's a defender. So that idea of getting, contributions across the roster and the one on Friday, she intercepted a pass, I think, and took it the length of the ice. And it was just like, yes, this is, like you said, this is what you need to see. Even if it wasn't a ton of points, it gave them a little bit more wiggle room in the NPI. It gave them some breathing room and moved them. Well, I guess I don't know where they're at now. They had moved up to 9th. Yes. At 10, you're the first one out, like any upset in any tournament, and you could be, on the outside looking in. So gave them some breathing room. Also, I think, and I again say this with love, is I think there's some, some petty joy that comes in screwing with your rival a little bit, right? Now Minnesota's down at 4 in the NPI, and I think that's a good motivating factor too. Like when you are where UMD is in this conference and kind of always punching up at these couple of teams, like that is a huge sort of mental win for them, and I think something really to build on, and that momentum going into the postseason. I think it's just really important. Like, they played 2 hard games and they came out with the result, and that, I think, especially as we've talked about, like, needing to see scoring from them and needing to see some stuff from them, I think they really are showing, like, the signs of life that we want them to be showing at this time of the season, right?
Absolutely. And you mentioned the NPI there. That did push Penn State above Minnesota to third in the NPI, Minnesota dropping to 4. And it's at 7/10 of a point gap there right now. So that's significant enough that I don't think good wins by Minnesota would be enough to overcome that without Penn State losing. And so that is a tough spot for Minnesota now to be in. Penn State is looking great in third, and Minnesota might end up in that 4-5 game in the regionals, where they only play one game at the regional site.
Be interesting too, because that's where it gets into sort of the nitty-gritty of the NPI, right? Where, like, Penn State isn't going to get, like, much from their wins in their conference
Right.
tournament, but wouldn't get punished for those.
Right.
Like, bad wins, quote unquote. So this, yeah, it's a very interesting place to be, and yeah, an unfortunate place for Minnesota in to get there now, because yeah, at this point, like, we have to assume Penn State's gonna cruise like they did through the regular season through the AHA. So yeah, unfortunate pair of overtime losses for them in this situation.
Definitely. Otherwise, in the WCHA, it was, kind of chalk. Wisconsin swept St. Cloud State. Ohio State swept Bemidji State on the road. That left Wisconsin with the same 2-point lead and that it had entering the weekend. So the Badgers won their second straight WCHA championship and get Bemidji State in the first round of the playoffs. Ohio State gets St. Thomas. We'll have more on that again in a little while. Want to turn back to Hockey East, where we previewed a game last week. Number 5 Northeastern playing number 6 UConn. That ended up going to overtime as well. Northeastern getting a win 3-2 on Friday. Morgan Jackson scoring in overtime. Lisa Janssen making 35 saves. I think that I had previewed it by saying UConn had a chance to, plant the seed a little bit for a potential playoff game, right? And maybe they did a little bit of that. Look, they're right there. They're in overtime.
So they didn't not, but they didn't.
Right.
Yeah,
They didn't fully do it.
they didn't play the whole play. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's another step for Northeastern toward one, solidifying that number 5 spot where they don't have to play a first round game. Number 5 in the NPI don't have to play a first round game in the regionals, but also just going into the playoffs with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, now I'm thinking to myself, that's an interesting matchup, a possible Minnesota Northeastern 4-5 game. Yeah, interesting, something to think about. Yeah, Northeastern, I think, has done, for the most part, everything right. Like, there's been a couple small stumbles and hiccups, but like they're a team that we weren't necessarily picking to win the conference this year, and they just have done little by little, step by step. They weren't trying to do too much at the beginning, and we're just sort of building and have rolled that all the way to the end of the season and have themselves in a really great spot. They've got scoring from a lot of different people, and Lisa Janssen is just a really great goaltender. They just have a really solid base. I'm not sure. I mean, Striker Zablocki continues to have an outstanding season, and is climbing up the ranks of scoring there. And so I think, they have some, sort of your regular scoring, and also just some of that really dynamic stuff that some of these players can pull out, including Striker. And so, yeah, and they get, they get their Olympian back, and yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's been so close in some of these Hockey East games that I still think there's a chance of an upset. I think it's still probably likely that both UConn and Northeastern, may get NCAA bids, but yeah, I do think that there's still a chance that we could see some craziness there. But I do think that for the most part, Northeastern is in the driver's seat and seems to be pretty in control of playing their game and sort of coming out in the end.
Right. Franklin Pierce got to the finish line in New High as regular season champions last weekend, beating St. Anselm 4-2 on Friday. St. Anselm got a victory 6-2 on Saturday, but it was done by that point. Franklin Pierce winning the regular season championship. Assumption lost to Sacred Heart in overtime 4-3 on Friday, but then beat Sacred Heart 3-2 on Saturday. So it ends up being Franklin Pierce, Assumption, St. Anselm as the top three teams. Stonehill in fourth in New High. So congratulations to Franklin Pierce on the accomplishment of, I believe, picked for fourth at the start of the season in New High and finishing first. So that's the proof again that no one really knows what they're talking about in September.
We're all just guessing.
Yeah,
I mean that particularly too, that comes from coaches, meaning it's people most familiar with playing these teams and their rosters and the turnover. So yeah, second title for them, but I think, and they're the team that has been so good in the postseason, in the conference tournament, and pulled some upsets in recent years. So I think probably the favorites to take it to wire, but it will, I mean, nothing there has been as we expected either.
Right.
So I certainly would not be putting money on anything at this point in any of these leagues.
New High feels like a league where it's just, home ice doesn't necessarily matter. We've seen over the years. It's gonna be a bounce or two or something like that decides a championship game at the end.
Yeah, hot goalie streak. Yeah, I quite literally feel like other places I could make some educated guesses, some of the other conferences, but I feel like I would just be, I don't know, pulling names from a hat would be the best way to possibly pick that bracket with like any sort of regularity. Because I just think you could talk yourself in circles, like they beat them and they beat them, and like it just keeps going.
Well, that's what makes it fun, and when you get to the playoffs, is that when you don't know what to expect, it's good watching. So, okay, that's our spin through the 5 leagues for this week. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will talk about the Olympics and what we saw there, and a little bit about what we're going to see with some of those players returning this week to their college teams. We saw a few of them back last week, but the U.S. players will be getting back to their teams this week. So. We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us on the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. Todd and Nicole with you to talk some Olympics for the final time in this cycle anyway. The U.S. comes out with the gold medal after a 2-1 overtime victory over Canada last Thursday. Nicole, was at a watch party at UW-Madison, Wisconsin's, one of their unions, and it was a cool sight to see the entire room full. It was on a big screen. There was a lot of tables and chairs set up as kind of a restaurant setting, but man, there was nowhere to sit. There was hardly anywhere left to stand by the end of it, which was, the part of the good fortune of the timing of it is that it wasn't at 11 o'clock at night like it had been. I feel like the last two was in the middle of our work day, but it was I think what we expected a U.S.-Canada game to be, not necessarily the 5-0 game that we saw in the preliminary round or some of those games that we saw in the rivalry series. This was what U.S.-Canada has been. Every shift means something, every puck battle means something, and it comes down to, one shot at the end.
Yeah, not to sound like too, I don't know, like smug but like I think anybody that has watched US Canada did not think that this was going to be a blowout game. Like anybody familiar with like long-term women's international hockey, like there were definitely people that were like, "Oh my God, US is the favorite, Canada's an underdog," and I'm just like the US can be the favorite. That doesn't make Canada an underdog. Like those are not necessarily like direct. I am a little jealous. You got to watch it in a big group. I watched it by myself, mostly because I was also, typing and doing stuff while, being on social during it. So not really by myself, but in the room. Definitely scared Ripley a few times with my yells.
I should say I had my back to it, so I didn't get to watch a ton of it because I was watching people watching it, and trying to get video of it. So I got to see, peeking behind me a decent portion of it, but Hillary Knight's goal did not see that happen live. The overtime goal did not see that happen live either. So had to go back and watch those later.
a bunch of the US players say they didn't see it live too, either because they were like changing. Like Taylor
Right.
Haase made the pass and then went for the change. It's part of why she made the long pass. She's like, I need to change. But also I think, and I think Megan Keller knows that people don't necessarily assume she's the one that's going to toe drag somebody and backhand flip the puck into the. So I don't think people necessarily thought that was the play that was going to end things. Yeah, like you said, I think it's the game we expected. I expected Canada to come harder. I expected it to be a little tougher. I guess I didn't expect it to be 58 minutes in before and pulling the goalie before the US scored. I mean, after as prolific as they were for most of the tournament. But I thought Canada played a really good defensive game. They read the US really well and sort of kept them, to the outside. There was a player open in the slot, an absolute ton that the US kept missing. Like they'd have the puck behind the net and not get it to that person that was wide open. So that was a little frustrating. I think there were some moments there's some missed opportunities that way. But I don't know, it felt like as the game went on and they were missing these opportunities, there were a couple wide open nets, there were power plays, and it was like, if maybe it's just not their day. Like if you're missing all these, like sometimes the puck just has to bounce your way for you to be able to win. And I have to say the longer that game went on and the more opportunities that were kind of on a platter for them and they missed, the more I was like, I don't know if the US is going to come away with the medal here. But obviously they did, and way to go. I guess some of the girls were saying Keller does pull some of that in the tournament or in the practices or after practice end, but generally she's not the offensive defender on this team, much more a slap shot from the blue line type of defender. So good for her for that big moment. And it was exciting. I thought it was overall the tournament was great because we saw such great play from our collegians, right? Like the talk has all been like, oh, you can keep watching these women go play the PWHL, and that's great, and like very excited about that. But I was excited too how much the collegians had an impact after all this talk about the youth and all that sort of stuff. Every one of those players, something like 35% of the US scoring came from, I haven't gone back and done all that math yet, but the collegians had a huge impact. Layla with the shot from the point that Hillary tipped in. I think there was talk on the Canada shorthanded goal, but that was a US power play, and the choice was to, push your defenders in. Layla's playing like a forward there, and she is not the defender that's going to chase down that play. So, if KK's there, it's a different story, but that's not the line that was on the ice. So, I just thought overall, after sort of like USA Hockey really put Layla forward in a ton of the promos this year and all this stuff. So I'm thankful for them, for all of the players that were sort of front and center, that this came to fruition in that way, and that like their moment doesn't end because they didn't win the gold medal,
Right. You think of the alternative where after the US won Worlds, won every game in the rivalry series, won the preliminary game in convincing fashion. If they didn't win the gold medal game and didn't score in the gold medal game, let's say, how much of a letdown that would have been, just being a couple minutes different, from the finish there.
Great.
That would have been
The
a
narrative would
real
have been
shock.
so
much different
Yeah.
for the entire, I don't know, you can't necessarily the 4 years, but the last year, that narrative would have been an entirely different thing coming out of this. So they saved an awful lot with what they did at the end.
Yeah, I agree. I think like it makes a difference on how many people are going to go watch the WHL, and just like I don't want to get into other narratives, but the way that people have been talking about women's hockey in the 4 days, well, a couple days since they won, people who are not very much in the women's hockey space, and I'm happy about that. But the way that their story has really amplified, to me, gives an idea of what it would have looked like had they lost, and how that the story being amplified and people talking about it would have looked very different. And I think just again it is unfortunate. I wish that one tournament, one cycle, 1-2 week thing isn't what can make or break the growth of women's hockey, but I don't think it's overstating it to say that like them winning here versus losing really changes like the trajectory and how things can continue to grow. I think a lot of little girls will go pick up, hockey sticks, and I think enrollment is going to go, and I think more people are going to turn on the PDub. It's a big deal that they can just go watch on YouTube and all of those things. I don't think that follows the same way if the US doesn't win here. So I think, particularly because I think Canadians as a general, the people that we're going to watch already are doing that in Canada. It's on TV there. I think I think this has a huge impact here in the U.S. And I very much think that would have been different with the loss. So very excited for that. I hope we continue to see more people come over. I hope the fact that we're right into NCAA playoffs helps, and that the collegiate players, not just on US, by the way, like, the Swiss players, the Swedish players, there are a ton of NCAA players on these other squads that really stood out throughout the tournament as well. And I think that we'll continue to see that impact. But sort of KK and Layla with their TikTok dances, and Layla doing stuff with Megan Thee Stallion and the Sesame Street characters, and Layla's everywhere right now. And I think that cultural moment is really huge, and the gold medal really is tips that into something much bigger than it would have been without it.
Want to talk about the bronze medal too. Switzerland getting a 2-1 victory in overtime over Sweden to take the bronze, and that's, that game is one of the hardest to play, because you were that close to being in the gold medal game, and you're also that close to leaving with nothing out of the tournament. And that's how Sweden had to feel, is that, we were there, and then all of a sudden we're in this other game, and now we're leaving without a medal altogether because Switzerland scores in overtime. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on just how Switzerland came through this tournament in terms of, how they progressed and what they might be able to take away from that.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Switzerland, for the last couple of tournaments that I've talked to some of their coaches, both senior and U18 World Championships, has sort of struggled with their lack of depth. It's a small country that doesn't have a ton of people. Like, the pool of people they're coming from is not as big. And then also just generally the European countries, we have this problem with development from a younger age, right? And so I thought, they went in with this sort of defense first, not necessarily very pretty. I mean, they didn't pack it in. They did plenty of strong most of their goals came from a forecheck and a turnover and capitalizing on it. But I did think that it was really interesting the way that they played this really defensive shape. They stuck to it no matter who they were playing. Like, they were still able to do it effectively against Canada. They made a plan, they made a decision, and they stuck to it, and they executed it about as perfectly as they could have wanted to. It will be interesting to see sort of the ramifications of that. If we'll see another team try something like that, if they'll keep going like that. I mean, I thought Sweden actually had a really great tournament. I think, they were at the disadvantage of playing in that B group and never playing a really hard game, then getting beat by the US and suddenly having to win or go home, And so we're switching groups the next time around, so they won't be in that same we won't have the weighted groups the same way. But I was impressed with how Sweden played. I thought that is probably the best overall Sweden has looked, probably in a couple tournaments. But yeah, I was really impressed. It's so simple to some extent. We see it a decent amount in the NCAA, right? Like, we see maybe some of the teams in the bottom half of conference standings doing this to try and withstand, when they're playing some of the top ranked teams in the country. And they usually can't do it for a whole 60 minutes or do it for a whole 120 over the course of a weekend. And they also usually don't also do that and have a strong forecheck where they're not giving up too much space in the other direction. And yeah, I was really impressed with what Sweden did and how they executed it again and again, game after game, and it worked for them. And, it felt fitting that it was, I had called, before overtime, I said I wanted Laura Stalder just because she hadn't scored yet. I thought, like, this is going to be the big moment, but certainly not at all disappointing or unfitting for Alina Mueller to be the one that scored the overtime game winner, since she did it at 15 the last time they won a bronze medal. But yeah, you have those couple of standout stars, and then they had their solid plan, and man, they just did such a good job of keeping teams to the outside, but still not getting too caught up in board battles. And yeah, it was an interesting class. I think could be quite a lot to learn for some coaches to go back and just watch what Switzerland did game after game in this tournament.
Right. A lot of years we'd be looking forward to, okay, well, it'll be 4 years till we get to this, this level of interest and excitement again. But with the P-Dub being there, it's nice that there's high level, best on best kind of hockey still out there in the women's game that the league goes right back to here now, instead of maybe there's a world championship in April or May or whatever, but
Yeah.
there's enough out there to keep people interested and keep that appetite going.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously us, we're going to talk about the NCAA too. So it's a really great time for these players to come back to both those two places, and people get to watch. And then, we usually don't have worlds in an Olympic year. We had it in 2022 because we haven't had that because of COVID. And now they're going to do it in August, I believe, and we'll see women's worlds move to August now. So, just a really great couple. Like, we're going to roll right out of this into NCAA playoffs, into the Frozen Four, and then right into PWHL playoffs, and then not long after that. Like, we've got high level hockey for several months on deck now, which is pretty amazing.
Awesome, and we will be talking about some of that here as we continue on. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the impact players that are returning to their college teams. Maybe they came back last week or they're coming back this week. And now that everyone's in the playoffs, let's talk about how all those playoffs could go and what's coming ahead. Stay with us on the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. Todd and Nicole here for our final segment, which is looking ahead to this week's games, everything in the playoffs now. And this is going to be an interesting return for a lot of players, Nicole, who just went through a really physical and emotional couple of weeks in Milan at the Olympics, and now they come back and get right into the playoffs. The team that I cover, Wisconsin, has 5 players coming back from the Olympics. 4 of them won gold with Team USA. We saw when we were at the Wisconsin St. Cloud State game on Sunday, Laura Zimmerman had just gotten back from Milan from winning a bronze medal, and then was not in the lineup Saturday, but was on Sunday, and just tip of the hat to that, to coming back that quickly and getting back in the lineup. First of all,
I was impressed by the players that were back, the players from Germany and some of the and Finland, the other players that were back. And then she was still playing on Thursday and made it to Madison. I mean, she was there on Saturday, she just didn't play.
That's what I heard,
was
right?
Like, did she fly right into like absolutely like crazy commitment? Good for her. Also, like commitment to her college team, because she could have stayed and done post and done the closing ceremonies and things like that. But yeah, like just absolutely. We had number of, and then Amelia Kirko played net on Sunday. Louisa Welke scored, or I'm sorry, Lily scored for BU. Just like these players immediately came back and again had an impact. And I can't imagine what that transition is like. I guess maybe some of the European players are a little more used to it because they never centralized, and so this is
True.
fairly standard. But still, like, you're talking a week away from playing in the Olympics to playing, going back to your college team. So I just think, like, I'm so impressed by all of them. And I guess, for the Wisconsin players, it's probably a little easier coming back with the buzz of the gold medal as opposed to being, disappointed. They probably trying to find that balance between partying and knowing they got to come back, or celebrating, I should say, as opposed to partying. But yeah, it will be really interesting to see sort of what that reentry process looks like. And again, I think, the thing for the Americans is they have no precedent. There's nobody that can give them advice on what does this look like, what worked for some people, what should they avoid. Whereas, some of the other international players have done this, in previous Olympic cycles. And so maybe had a little bit more in the locker room to talk about like what is possible. But yeah, it's could be a very interesting WCHA tournament, right? Like there you could be talking about, what'd you say, 6 Olympians there?
Yeah.
In the final face-off?
Right. And I was talking with people this weekend that, just think of
medalists,
that
6 gold
tournament.
medalists, more Olympians. Yeah.
Right. Think of the tournament that could be in the WCHA final face-off next weekend, if it ends up being the top 4 teams going through, as it has been most years. You're talking about gold medalists being on 4 of them on Wisconsin, one of them on Minnesota, one of them on Ohio State. And that seems like a great thing to be able to promote. But the WCHA can't necessarily do that because they can't guarantee all those teams are going to win this week and get there. But if they do, I would imagine there'd be quite a last minute kind of push to get the word out that, man, there's going to be an awful lot of talent in this. There is going to be regardless, but I mean, look at the players who just won gold medals who are going to be in this event. Could be interesting.
Kind of. Yeah, that's a bit of a humble brag, right? Yeah, so I guess if you are in the Twin Cities area, you should be planning ahead for University of St. Thomas hosts it. Those tickets are on sale, and people should be planning to get themselves to that. Like you said, I mean, when are you ever going to get the opportunity to watch 6 gold medalists take the ice, and then probably another? I didn't count it up, but at least half dozen other Olympians. I mean, you got all the Theo Hansen, Hilda Svensson, Raunio. Like, there's going to be so many Olympians on the ice, regardless of who makes that Final Four.
Right.
WCHA Final Face-Off starts March. It's Thursday, Saturday this year, so Thursday, March 5th, Saturday, March 7th. Yeah, that's a heck of a something to hang your hat on, I think.
Yes, absolutely. So the first round this week in the WCHA best of 3, all of these series, starting Friday, Bemidji State at Wisconsin, St. Thomas at Ohio State, St. Cloud State at Minnesota, Minnesota State at Minnesota Duluth. Any thoughts on that lineup? I think, as we talked about before, the ones that are in the middle are usually the series that get a little bit closer, but we saw last year Minnesota had to go 3 games to knock off Minnesota State, if I recall correctly, in the opening round, and they were, I believe, the 3rd seed. So anything could happen there.
Yeah, sort of continuing that UMD conversation from earlier. Like, now they've got to play Minnesota State, who has done plenty of damage this season, and I think is probably the team most likely to upset anybody. UMD cannot take this series lightly. They absolutely need to help protect their NPI position. And so that last series wasn't just big for their for all of those reasons, but hopefully helps them sort of carry that momentum and confidence into this series, because I think Minnesota State's really going to push them and test them, and I imagine that they will. I imagine that will go to 3 games. I think that one's the most likely. And I just think Minnesota State's got a lot of firepower. They're going to need everything from Ev Gascon that they can get.
Yep. And she's given them that lately. She's really seemed to
for
turn
sure.
things up a notch in the last.
Part of me is like, I just assume she's going to be great, but like, that's not fair to her either. She shouldn't have to be.
Right. In ECAC, it's again best of 3 series now after a single game opening round. Number 12 seed Union, which knocked off Clarkson, now has to go to number 1 seed Yale, and then it's Harvard at Princeton, Brown at Quinnipiac, Colgate at Cornell. The Colgate Cornell series, I think, could be a doozy. I think that those are 2 teams that, in most seasons are battling for NCAA tournament spots. It's not quite there right now, but to say one of those teams is going to have their season over after this weekend it's going to be rough on them, given where they normally are.
Yeah, and doesn't it feel like you could play 100 games and a bunch of them would go to overtime, and they'd still probably end up about 50-50 in that?
Sure.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. The other one that caught my eye is Harvard Princeton. Those 2 split their series this year, particularly with the goalkeeping for Harvard with Ainsley Tuffy.
Yeah.
In Princeton, you're never quite sure what you're going to get from them. And so
Right.
I think, when Princeton's sort of hitting on all cylinders, they're a really tough team to beat, but they also have shown to be fallible. And in particular, towards the end of the season, they had that loss to Harvard 3-2. On the 7th, they lost to Yale 2-0, bounced back with a 3-2 win in overtime to Brown. But, had a week off and now are getting a tough Harvard series. It will definitely, I think, push them and test them, particularly if Ainsley Tuffy plays the way that we've seen
Right.
from her the rest of this season. I expect that. But yeah, I think that is a bit of a trap series for Princeton. It's a tough pull for them
Right.
this early in
And
their tournament.
Princeton is the one that's on the bubble now too, at number 10 in the MPI. So there is a little bit of a gap between 10 and 11, but you don't like to be there. You don't like to tempt fate when you're the last team in and waiting on other things to hopefully go your way. So better to be still having a chance to win your way in than waiting at the end.
Yeah, control your own destiny for sure.
Yeah. In Hockey East, the format there goes Wednesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday with single games over the next 2 weeks to do 4 rounds. I don't know
how anybody keeps any of this straight. Probably will write something up for USCHO because the AHA takes 4 weeks to run their postseason. I don't know what's happening in any one of these conference tournaments in terms of who plays what days and what format.
Sure. So it starts on Wednesday night this week. Well, I try. Merrimack at Maine, Providence at BU on Wednesday this week. Those are the teams that finished 7th through 10th in the standings, 7 and 8 hosting those games. The winners then will play either Northeastern or UConn. The lowest remaining seed plays Northeastern. The higher seed remaining out of those 2 winners plays UConn, the number 2 seed. Those next round games on Saturday, also Vermont at Boston College, New Hampshire at Holy Cross in that quarterfinal game on Saturday before they get back together as the final 4 seeds for Wednesday single games the following week, and then the Saturday championship game. So I'm intrigued by the Providence BU game on Wednesday, especially.
Mm-hmm.
We know that this season fell short of where BU thought they could be especially after last season. I just don't know that there's how much of a postseason run there can be, but you have to at least get
they won
the first
round
to get there. Yes.
Yeah, they have the experience, which is definitely something. The interesting thing in this Hockey East tournament to me is that it's teams 5 through 9 are separated by less than 10 points in the overall standings. So you've got, overall you've got Holy Cross and New Hampshire were 10-win teams in conference. Vermont had 9. Maine, Boston, BU, and Providence each had 8. That's the slimmest of margins between.
Yeah, talking about overtime results meaning a lot there. Yeah.
Yeah, between 16s, basically. So to me, that means that's all a huge toss-up, right? And even BC isn't that far ahead there. So yeah, to me, that's just a whole recipe for who knows what's going to happen, but it should be fun.
That's I think that's probably an understatement. I think when you get this many games in this few days, you have a chance for a lot of things to maybe blow up on the seedings for how it goes. So yeah, should be fun there. Atlantic Hockey down to their final 4 teams. It'll be a best of 3 this weekend. Syracuse at Penn State, Lindenwood at Mercyhurst. Syracuse getting an upset of RIT last week, which wasn't probably not necessarily an upset. They were pretty close in the standings, but did have to go on the road to do it. I still just feel like, well, sure, right. I still just feel like this is trending towards Penn State Mercyhurst play for the title.
Yeah, it sure seems like it, right? I would be. As much as we've talked about sort of everything else being unpredictable, to me, I assume this will be the most predictable of the, particularly when you're talking best of 3. There's just the difference between those 2 teams and sort of the rest of the conference is a pretty large gap.
It does kind of seem like it sometimes, yes. Nuha going into their postseason this week with best of 3 quarterfinal series. Post at Assumption, Long Island at Stonehill, Sacred Heart at St. Anselm, St. Michael's at Franklin Pierce, going in order from the 4 seed to the 1 seed. They're hosting in that order. I believe I had it. Maybe not. No, I don't think I had it right. But those were the matchups anyway. You can find the standings on USCHO.com to check the seeds if you are interested in that part of it. I do feel like there's a pretty decent chance that not the top 4 seeds don't all make it to next week in New High, even though we've seen, especially with the St. Anselm Sacred Heart series intrigues me as a 3-6 matchup, just because St. Anselm has been, touch and go lately. So let's see which team we get, I guess, when we get into the playoffs here. But also the Stonehill LIU, those are 2 teams that are pretty close in the standings too. So let's see. I think there could be some pretty good series there.
You have to be peaking at this time of the season. You have to be playing your best hockey, and you have to be a team that can pull out a tough game. And if you can't do that in this part of the tournament, it's not going to get you're not going to win the bid, right? Like, you're not going to take it all the way. So you're going to get tested early, but that's only, gonna do better for you as your season goes on. And so I think sort of who comes out of this, it's that sort of metal sharpening metal. And I think that's what's interesting about this is like who handles the pressure, who handles, like, who can come back, if they're coming from behind, just sort of all the little things that you've been learning throughout your season that you have to be able to put into practice sort of all together at once. And I think that's what makes these games so interesting and fun, because none of them have put it all together yet. And so the team that really does sort of dig deepest is the one that's going to come out of this one here, I think.
Right. All right. Anything else we need to touch on before we wrap things up for this week? That was a lot of stuff going back last week and into this week. But this is the time of the year where it gets exciting, because all these games really do. You're talking about teams fighting for their seasons, and we've only got 4 weeks left until this is all done. So it's crunch time.
Every week somebody's year is over, right? Like that's you're talking not just really exciting wins, but the difference between making the tournament or not, between your season going on or not. Like there's going to be, tears and sad players every week because of this. Like, so you're not just playing, it's not as simple anymore. No, I mean, I think it's just such a fun time. I have a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that we're through the regular season. Like, it just, that second half went really fast for me, and a little unprepared, but it'll be fun. And I guess it did come up organically, but I just really want to shout out, if you haven't seen Vermont Una Havana won in overtime with a between the legs goal. We will link it in the podcast post as well on USCHO, but one of the prettiest goals, and for an overtime game winner. I just think when we see stuff like that, I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to know about it. So shout out to her for that. But there were some just really great like I said, I think I posted like 8 or 10 goals today on Victory Press that were all overtime game winners. But yeah, I think just, watch games. There's plenty happening. There's tournaments happening, all across the East Coast. So if you're somebody out there, like, look where your nearest conference is playing a tournament. Check out these games. I saw Holy Cross, I believe, said their game is free this week. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to go out and watch, top level talent and tons of Olympians coming back for teams across. It's not just, your top 1, 2, 3, 4 teams. There's Olympians coming back to programs all across the country. So, yeah, go out and support them, and see this part of the game, and see, sort of the future, of the international game as well. Obviously we love the NCAA, and we're probably preaching to the choir, but I hope if anybody's, tuning in for the first time because of the Olympics, go check out some NCAA hockey this week. Or sign up for ESPN Plus, because both the ECAC and Hockey East are there. It's your most affordable option for watching postseason hockey.
Indeed. Okay, that wraps up for this week. When we talk to you next week, we will have the matchups for the conference championship weekend. We'll be looking ahead to Selection Sunday by that point too, and we'll maybe do a little bit of bracketology and what we might be looking for on that last week in terms of those games that are remaining. So, for Nicole, I'm Todd. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.